good Monday morning to you. It's late September, almost fall, crisp, cool New England morning up here. And I've got a guest from Florida. His name is Christian. I want to pronounce this right, Christian. So Christian de la Huerta.
Perfect. That's really good. I'm impressed.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying. It's not exact, but it's close, right? So, Christian, he does a lot of things, but he's a TEDx speaker. He's a retreat facilitator. He's also a transformation coach. But he wrote a book called "Awakening the Soul of Power," and I read this book on my way down to South Carolina last month, and actually a couple days on the trip as well. I thought it was just such a cool book. And it basically, if I had to sum it up, it's a book on how we can all find power within ourselves. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about that, Christian's background and the work he does today. And without further ado, Christian, thank you for being here with me today.
Hey, Dave, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to sit here in conversation.
Yeah, I do as well. So I'm going to let you kind of get us kicked off here. I'm really most interested in what your ultimate intention was when you decided to actually put pen to paper and start writing this book. What were you trying to accomplish?
It's you said it. It's, to me, it was a way to encourage and give people a path to stepping into their own power. Because what I've realized over, more than 3 decades of working with people as a coach and as a retreat facilitator all over the world is that most of us have an ambivalent, maybe even conflicted relationship to power. Like, part of us wants it, part of us is afraid of it. And I think what we fear is, like, if we really stepped into who we are, into all of who we are, that other people might not be able to handle it, and that we might end up rejected and alone. I think we also fear that we might abuse it and cause harm. And no wonder, because all we got to do is turn on the news on any given day, Dave, and to witness at least one abuse of power. And so what good-hearted person wants to do that? And then on top of that, we've been conditioned to believe that power is a bad thing, with quotes like "power corrupts," "absolute power corrupts absolutely." And so who wants to be corrupted? What they didn't tell us about that quote, though, is that Lord Acton was speaking specifically about political power, not the personal power that you and I are talking about. So when you add to that mix the fact that we've also been conditioned to fear the emotions, we walk away from conflict, we hate confrontation, we've labeled the emotions weakness, especially us as men. Since little kids, we're told little boys don't cry, because there's some twisted misunderstanding that emotions are weakness, or that the feminine is weak. If you just a little parentheses, if you want to talk power and courage and strength, let's talk about the power of creation that resides in a female body. Anyway, when you put all that stuff into the mix, what happens is that we end up giving our power away, our inherent, innate power that nobody can give to us, nobody can take away. We are the only ones who give it away. And the sad part, the lame part, is that we give it away for an illusion of security, for a false sense of acceptance. We play small, we say yes, we override our beliefs and our principles and our thoughts for morsels of pseudo love, and it's not a really good strategy. And so what the message of the book is that there's a way that we can step into power that doesn't have to do with hierarchy and fear and control and force and manipulation, that doesn't require that we push anybody down, that we step on them, squelch them in order for us to feel powerful. That we can do this in a way that is a match for the inherent goodness in our hearts.
So you, at one point in your life, like all of us, didn't necessarily feel that power. I know throughout the book you talk about finally, well, not even finally, it sounds like it's been several years where you feel a sense of just peace in your life. But at one point you didn't. As a kid, you grew up in Cuba, or at least for the first few years of your life, you were in Cuba until your parents decided that, hey, we want to go to the States. But being there after they just made that decision was not easy. And then you battled some other things, mentally. So can you talk about that? Bring us back to a place where you just didn't feel the way you do now.
Yeah, thanks for asking that, because I think it is significant in that I'm an unlikely person to be writing about power or to be writing about what it means to live heroically. in the 21st century. Because like you said, I grew up in Cuba my first 10 years of life. So very, communist, totalitarian, dictatorial regime in which any conversation about personal power or personal agency or rights is just ludicrous and laughable. There was no such thing because the state pretty much owns you and tells you what to do and what you're going to believe in. And I also grew up in a very Catholic environment, and with all due respect, it's also a very hierarchical power over where you're told everything. You're told what to believe in, what not to believe in, what's right and what's wrong. And when we came to the States, in search of freedom and the ability to this multiple sacrifices, like incredible sacrifices, my parents made so that their kids would have choice and freedom, and the right to believe whatever we wanted to believe in. But it was incredibly difficult to transition because, for one thing, I didn't speak a word of English, and we went to this little town in the middle of Georgia where I was the only non-native in my class. I was a good student growing up. I had it's one of the benefits of having been raised in Cuba is we had a TV, but there was nothing worth watching. So we grew up reading, and I think because of that, I became a good student. I knew how to learn. But here's part of like an example of how we give our power away. In high school, I had pretty much a 4.0, except for 1B, my last semester. And I didn't do this consciously back then. Like I didn't set out to do this, but looking back on it, I know that I sabotaged my GPA because there is no way that I could have gotten up in front of an auditorium filled with hundreds and hundreds of people to deliver the valedictorian speech. There's just no way. And so flash forward, these days I speak all over the world. I've spoken at dozens and dozens of universities, at colleges, on the TEDx stage, like you were said and shared in the introduction. I know that whatever happened in our past, all that stuff can be healed. And so that what I write about is not hypothetical stuff, is stuff that I live, stuff that I practice, and that's how I overcame so many of the obstacles that I overcame.
But as a young kid, when your parents decided to come here, you didn't decide. Your sister didn't decide. They decided, and then there was a process that you had to go through or wait for in order to get to the States. But as soon as, what I thought was just crazy is the way the schools and the teachers reacted to you, and your sister, right? You're both good students, good kids, but the way you were treated from that point on changed. So as a child, how the heck did you deal with that?
Yeah, as soon as you applied for permission, like for a visa to leave the country, you were considered, a traitor, like you betrayed the revolution, and you were called gusano, which means worm. And, to me, the tragic part of that is that we were kids, like, I don't know, third grade, fourth grade, and always at the top of the class. And as soon as the school found out that we were leaving, that we had applied, it took years to get permission. But just from that point of applying for permission, we never got awards ever again. We never got, we were called gusanos by teachers. Like, I don't even get how a teacher can do that with a kid, no matter what the beliefs are. Like, to call a kid a worm, and then we were kind of ostracized. We never even got like cookies at break when the other kids did, and then when we came to the States, it's like I stood out. I was different because I didn't speak the language. And then by the time 3 years later, I'd learned, kind of mastered or learn the language well enough to fit in, and gone through the process that so many kids go through of denying parts of who we are in order to feel accepted or to try to fit in. Then we moved back to Miami, where I went to a private Catholic high school that was like probably 99% Cuban American. So then I stand out again because I sound like a Georgia peach. And so, it's like, no matter what, I think I came this lifetime to learn what it felt like to be different. And on top of all that, I was really already struggling with a deeper, darker secret, which is that I knew that I was gay.
When did you know that?
I can't tell you, but before 10. And it's interesting because even before I knew what sex was about, but my romantic fantasies were about women, but I was turned on. Like, I felt attracted to men, and to same, to guys. Like, I don't even know how that works. Like, I think you just come in with it. And like before I even understood sex, like I already felt that attraction.
You felt like you needed to keep that under
Oh my
wraps.
God, are you kidding me? It was such a deep, dark secret. My because my dad was a psychiatrist, and not only was I struggling with the religion part of it, like there was a part of me who wanted to be a priest, who wanted to serve God, or as I understood it then,
Yep.
the sacred, and yet being told by the religion in which I was raised that I was an abomination, that I was going to burn in hell for eternity. And here's an example. Like I went to as far as when I was a kid. Um, I asked a priest, "How long is eternity exactly?" And he said, coming from an island environment, he said, used a good metaphor, an appropriate metaphor. He goes, well, imagine you're going to go to the beach with a thimble and you start taking water out of the ocean with a thimble. That's eternity, which terrified me because to put things in context, these days, masturbation is still considered a mortal sin. For your listeners who don't understand about mortal sins in Catholicism, there's a different hierarchy of sins. There's your menial sins that are not so bad. You're lying, you're stealing, that kind of thing, cheating. And then there's your mortal sins, which means that if you die without having confessed, and this can't be done directly, it has to be done through a priest, through an intermediary. If you die without having received absolution for a mortal sin, you go to hell. And masturbation is still considered a mortal sin. I mean, most priests don't.
We're all in trouble then.
I know, man. I know. I know. And I mean, most priests don't really, guilt people with that because they know how common it is and what a normal part of the human experience that is. But not to mention the unmentionable sin that I was really worried about.
Right.
So yeah, and I'm really grateful for all that. I wouldn't want to go through it again. I wouldn't wish it on anybody else, but I'm grateful for the experience because all that experience of feeling different, all that pain, that alienation that I went through is like my adolescence was one long depression with suicidal fantasies. Having gone through that gives me empathy. Has given me the ability to empathize, to feel with, to have compassion for somebody else's pain, somebody who might have been dying. Maybe the details are different, but the pain is kind of the same. I'm grateful for that, for that experience, for that reason. And the good news is, like, flash forward these days, no matter the circumstances of my life, like whether a relationship works out or it doesn't, a project succeeds or it fails, in quotes, never, ever, ever do I question my sense of self. Like my self-acceptance, my self-love are just established and unshakable, so that, again, I know what I'm talking about. Like I know how many of us struggle with self-doubt, with self-esteem issues. It's like, I I understand. So did I. And there's a way to heal that. There's a way to get through that. And that's what I share a lot of that in the book.
I remember working with this guy once, and going back to you having to deal with your sexuality. We worked with this guy back, 30 years ago, and he was gay, but he never would admit it. And no one was challenging him to admit it, but he just lived with the weight of the world on his shoulders. And after he resigned from the job, there was a going away party for him. And that night he decided, that's it, I'm telling everybody. Everyone already knew, but it was so, I felt so happy for this guy. And I'm so happy that you finally said something. You've been carrying this. Everyone's known it. But I think in that moment, he was like he lost 1,000 pounds or something. But
yeah.
You must meet all sorts of people, thousands of people all around the world. Everybody's got their own stuff they bring to the conversation. I would assume that your past and all of your experiences allow you to relate. I know what that feels like. I know what it feels like to not say this or to hold back there.
I think the process goes like this. We can't do anything about what we're not aware of. And as humans, we are so brilliant at denying stuff and suppressing stuff, like this guy you were talking about. Right? Because the stuff is so conflicting, and we're such in pain, and there's those areas in us that we just cannot even look at. So we're great about running away from all this stuff, and brilliant at medicating, at self-medicating, and numbing out, and not thinking about the stuff. And that's one of the blessings of having, having been gay, is that we had to deal with profound existential questions at a young age, like questions that I think most of us end up dealing with at some point. But for me, it was existential. Like, who am I and what am I here for, and why, and what happens afterwards, right? So all those profound questions, which is part of the human experience, but we're brilliant at running away from all that stuff. We stuff it in some closet in the back of a drawer somewhere in what's called a shadow, and yet we numb it out, with TV or social media or gaming or sex or substances or food, work, workaholism, just all the things that we do to not think, right, and not feel. But the tragedy of that is that stuff doesn't go away. It's still having an impact on the quality of our lives and our relationships from the subconscious. And that's why, you can't run away from that stuff. It's only going to get worse. So the earlier that we face our inner demons, the better. And that's why this book is part of a series titled Calling All Heroes, because what we're talking about, Dave, as you know, is it's not easy. Like it's heroic work to look inside and to face ourselves and to face our inner demons and to ask the hard questions. Why do we do the things we do? Why do we sabotage ourselves? Why do we get stuck in these self-defeating patterns of behavior and relationships that really don't work for us? Mm-hmm. And why do we keep selling out on our power and saying yes when inside we really feel no, and stuffing ourselves into small little packages so as not to rock the boat too much? But none of that works. None of that works. As your friend, from 30 years ago, that your coworker finally realized that the power of liberating ourselves and the power of self-acceptance. And before we can get to that place, we've got to be self-aware. That's the first step, is asking the questions. Why do we do the things we do? And so in this, connecting it to this conversation about power, a good way to begin is asking ourselves, what do I believe about power? Right? So beginning to unpack, to deconstruct our beliefs about power. Mm-hmm. And so, for example, a lot of women, I work with women around this issue, do retreats that are just for women and women's empowerment. And that's because a lot of them have the belief that if they really stepped into all of who they are, that they wouldn't find a mate, because they believe that all men are threatened by powerful women, which is not the case. It's an assumption. But if we have beliefs like that going on, of course, we're not going to step into our power. Or if we have, applying it to relationships, if we have a belief that if I get into a relationship, I'm going to lose my freedom, that I'm going to be cheated on, I'm going to be left, I'm going to be hurt, I'm going to be abandoned, then who in the right mind would get into a relationship? But so we end up, calling people over, but
yeah, you're always on the sidelines. I'm not going to fully, you know what, and I don't want to derail this. You brought something up in the book about, and I related to this because I did the same thing. You got caught up in picking on some kid, and then later on you felt guilt about it. I was a small little kid. I didn't really get picked on. Every once in a while, I'd run into the wrong person, they'd throw me around. And then if I got the opportunity, though, if I could find somebody a little smaller than me, then I'd do that. And years later, I bumped into a buddy who ran into this kid that I used to pick on, and I felt so horrible when he brought the kid's name up. And the kid said, "Oh yeah, I know Dave. He's such a great guy." And this is what this kid said about me. And every day I tormented this kid. Wow. And I still to this day feel terrible about it. And when I read that story about you doing that, in that moment, you kind of gave away your power. You kind of misunderstood what power really was. It was like joining this pack of bullies, which that's what I ended up doing. And really you just give it all away in that moment. I know it's not exactly what you were talking about, but
it is an example of power strategies that we use that are not healthy, right? So the bully is one of those unhealthy ways in which we think we're expressing power, but it's not really, because it doesn't get us what we really want. It's not satisfying. Like here we are, decades later, and we still don't feel good about that. Right. And compared to what, this kid that you're talking about in my class, Like compared to what other people did to him, mine was pretty minor, but
Right.
still, it was enough that I still feel yucky about it, and wish that I could track him down and make amends. Apologize to him.
I got him on the phone. I got him right here, Christian. We're gonna.
That would be great. I would appreciate that. And it's human. It's kids. It's like kids. But I think what you're pointing to is the fact that it was my own woundedness that was driving that, because of my fear of being bullied. Then I did what everybody else did, and again, like I just wrote a poem, which compared to what other people that were actually doing mean things and hiding his stuff and messing with him physically, I never did that, but still, it was enough that I jumped on the bandwagon. And because it was coming from my own place of not feeling good about myself.
Right.
And to me, that's the point, right? Of the reasons of why we do the things we do. And that we think sometimes it's coming from a place of power, and it's not. It's not. And without getting into the political part of it, like to me, an example of that on the macro scale is the US after 9/11, when we had the goodwill of the entire planet. And at this point, we're the only superpower. And we had that choice point. What do we do? And what do? We abuse power. We invaded a country that for the wrong reasons. And we abused our power. And then we became global pariahs. And here we are, 20 years later, we're still living from the effects of that choice. We're still mired in situations in the Middle East that stem from that choice of abusing power. So, yeah, I mean, so many ways that we could take this conversation, and so the point again is that there is a way that we can step into power that is congruent with our nature, that doesn't require that we express it in unhealthy ways like bullying or passive aggressiveness is another example that we think it works. We don't think of it as a power play, but it is. Here, I'm watching TV and channel surfing, and my partner, my spouse, whoever is calling, hey, can you help me in the kitchen? And I say, yeah, I'll be right over. 10 minutes later, hey, can you come help me in the kitchen? Yeah, I'll be right over. That's what I'm saying. But inside, what I'm really saying is like, screw you. I'll come over when I'm good and ready. It's a pseudo power play, right? Because it's covert. We're not really stepping into our power. We're approaching it indirectly and being passive aggressive. So those are just a few of the strategies that I talk about, and which we've all done it. We've all done all of those at some point in our lives. Another good question for the audience is, okay, what situations trigger me in this area of power? In which situations do I tend to give away my power? Right. So it takes observation. It takes becoming aware. Do I tend to override my preferences or my beliefs with authority figures, whether they're parental or bosses or coaches or religious leaders, people that we have placed higher than us in some kind of hierarchy, or whatever the case may be? So beginning to become aware of why we do the things we do and what the patterns are, because once we see them, then we can do something about it.
Tell me if I misunderstood what you wrote here. I'm not sure if I did or I didn't, but you spend a lot of time in the book talking about the ego and then how that plays into these power plays. You talk about being passive aggressive or aggressive or controlling or intimidating or whatever. But there's a whole other side to the ego, the whole victim side, the whole, I never catch a break side, which is just as much of an ego-driven power play. Did I understand that right?
Oh yeah.
Even more manipulative, right?
It's the toughest one. Now you went for the jugular. And we don't have time to really get into the ego because it's a huge conversation, but really important to understand what the ego is, because most of us have a very limited understanding of what it is. And if we want to have the relationships that have a chance of working, if we want to have that sense of personal power and a life filled with meaning and purpose, we've got to understand what the ego is. And one of the ego strategies that you're pointing to is the victim, is because it's a fundamental relationship to life that we feel done to by life. Poor me, woe is me. If only that hadn't happened, right? If only mom had been this way, or dad hadn't left, or if only the teacher, the minister, society, sexism, homophobia, racism, if only. And not to deny anything, right? It's not to deny the system is stacked unfairly at this point. It's not to deny anybody's trauma. Like crap happened. But here's what it's saying is that one thing we know, like one of the few things that we can count on, is that life is going to continue throwing curveballs our way. As long as we're holding somebody or something outside of ourselves responsible for our state of being, for our happiness, for our success, we just gave our power away right there. Again.
Right. But some people believe that's true. They believe it's a fact.
I know. And that's why that's the hardest one to pop out of. Like in 30 plus years of doing this work, that is the hardest one to pop out of. But here's the thing. There's no way around it.
Right.
As long as you're holding somebody else or something outside of you responsible, you're giving your power away. And here's a way, not simple, well, simple to understand, not easy, but a way to reframe the situation. It's like, so no matter what happened, and again, stuff happened to most of us that should have never happened. And I'm really sorry about that. But no matter what happened, no matter what happens going forward, we can always choose how we're going to be in response to that. And that simple reframe changes everything, and it pops us out of that victim place. Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist, spent years in concentration camps. They took everything away from him. Not only his property, his education, his career, his family, his entire family died, including his pregnant wife, kind of soulmate kind of relationship. That guy was able to say that they could take everything away from him, except for one thing: the ability to choose how he would be in response to that. Sure. And that is ultimate empowerment.
I wonder how many people actually recognize that this is an option. I mean, if you've been conditioned to, like, think about the communist upbringing. Had you never left Cuba, would you be who you are today? Maybe not. You might have never felt safe enough to even say half of the stuff you said, or come out, or whatever it is. So maybe some of that is as a result of your circumstances. But you think about people that are so trapped in their neighborhood or so trapped in their country, and they don't even know that's possible. Like you've got a lot of work to do. How you got to live like another 100 years or 1,000 years to even make a dent on this. It's just so crazy.
I know. And even for those of us who are blessed or lucky or fortunate, however you think of it, to live in the democratic countries, like at least pseudo-democratic countries, that with so many rights and freedoms that we take for granted, like even the freedom to go to college and study what you want, that not everybody in the world has that option. Or I mean, so many rights to speak your mind and not be put in jail for it, to congregate peacefully. All these things that we take for granted are not available. And so, but even those of us in these type of developed and developing countries, most of us are caught up in the rat race, and giving our power away for the illusion of security of a biweekly paycheck. And if you tell me, okay, well, I make $500,000 a year, then we can talk about selling ourselves. But most of us are selling ourselves way cheaper than that. And for that illusion of security, because as the pandemic has shown us, these companies are here today, gone tomorrow. Jobs are here today, disappear the next day. Yep. And we're giving away our security. We're giving away our power to this illusion of an economic system, a made up economic system that we used to say was paper. And that's not even that. It's just ones and zeros up on a cloud somewhere.
Yeah.
And that's what we give our power away to, and our peace of mind. So freedom is really a state of mind that we all have access to. Yeah. I've had profound conversation with this artist, this young man from Cuba who was able to visit here. And he was saying, you know what, you can be free in Cuba and you can be a prisoner here Absolutely. And it reminded me of the quote by Nelson Mandela, who said that if he hadn't been able to find a way to forgive his the people who imprisoned him, who put him in prison, and his jailers who kept him there, that he would still be in jail. Right. The good news is that we all have access to it, no matter what the circumstances of our lives.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I think that that the real freedom is in our minds. It rings true. As a younger person, I would never admit if you pissed me off. I would never admit if I was upset or sad or hurt or anything. There was nothing that was ever going to get me to say that you got me the best of me. And that was like prison. That was like prison. It's when you actually can say those things. And the word I've always struggled with, it just I would say over the last few years, I've become more open or understanding of the word vulnerability, because there was a long time where I viewed that word as, don't ask me to be soft. Do not try to get me to fall apart and cry when I don't even want to. Right. I totally misunderstood what the word was really about. Do you have any thoughts on that? And how do you deal with that?
Yeah, there's a whole, chapter in the book about that, it's a path to power, because like you're saying, we misunderstand that where we've labeled, especially men, because we've got this twisted definition and limiting definition of what it means to be a man. And we've gotten this idea that you're going to walk around like this uncaring, unfeeling robot, because feeling is little boys don't cry and only little girls cry. And that's weakness. It's like, wait a minute. Like, the emotions are not strength. They're not weakness. They're not good. They're not bad. They're just energy, like everything else. Energy is coursing through our body. Depending on how we express them, they have a good or not so good effect. And there's a price to pay for that, because of that. Like the rate of suicide in this country among men, it's like 4 times as high. 70% of the suicides in the US are committed by middle-aged white men, which, is the group that still holds the majority of the power in the world. And so we would think, well, the group that holds the power should be doing better. But women outlive men in terms of longevity. Women outlive men by 5 years in this country, by 7 years globally.
Yeah.
So the system of power of, call it toxic masculinity, patriarchy, whatever you want to call it, is not working for anybody, including men.
Right. Well, but isn't it misunderstood power? Power is what? And when we think about it on the surface, money, titles, authority, all this horseshit, truthfully,
yes.
And we're holding on to something that's just poisoning us. Somebody put a quote up on LinkedIn the other day about, the person that holds on to judgment and hate and resentment and control is just poisoning themselves. They're not poisoning this side over there. They're the ones dying inside, and it's almost like they're too stupid to know it. My neighbor, I'll go off on a tangent for a second. Such a nice guy. He came over. So we ended up getting into this conversation about this stuff and the world and Afghanistan. And he was in Vietnam. And I just remember him saying, he said, we were there. He said, I never had any issues over there. We got along with the South Vietnamese, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He said, but you know what? At the end, we didn't want to be there and they didn't want us there. And he said, it was just this, what are we doing? And it was this whole power thing that you described. It's like, this is not the way to answers. It's not the way to understanding. It's this horseshit way of trying to manipulate or control. And it kills people, like mentally and physically. I'm off on a tangent. You got to shut me up.
No. It's not a tangent at all. It's completely relevant to what we're talking about. It's the theme of the book that you're pointing to, right? And that's you're like giving the main difference between, how we change our relationship to power, which is realizing that there's different types, and the type of power we're talking about here it's hierarchical, and it's fear-based, it's control-based, it's force-based, and it requires that we push somebody down. Right. And that's what most of us have associated with power. Yep. And what the book is saying is like, wait a minute, that's one kind of power. There is another type of power, which call it spiritual power, call it inner power, authentic power, soulful power, whatever you want to call it. But it's inside each one of us. And it doesn't need to prove anything to anybody. And it's actually more powerful. Yep. And so I think, for example, one of my favorite examples is Gandhi. from Lord of the Rings, in their simple monastic robes, their sandal feet. You would never know from looking at them how much power they hold until it's necessary. And then get out of the way. Yep. Like Gandhi brought the British Empire to its knees when it was at its highest point, global, in terms of global reach, without ever shooting a gun or landing a single punch. That's the kind of power that we all have access to.
Talk about women and their role in this, or maybe what we maybe hope their role could be in this.
Yeah, like, and thank you for asking. That's another one of my missions with this book. It's like the book is for everybody because everybody struggles with power, and it has a particular message for women, and that comes from my belief, my conviction that the empowerment of women is the single most important thing that needs to happen in the world. And it's not to idealize women. It's not to put women up on a pedestal. Women also abuse power. And it's certainly not to give women more crap that they have to clean up in this world. It's because as a species, we've been running very off kilter between the masculine and the feminine energies that are just part of creation, right? And for some reason, for the last several thousand years, we've labeled the feminine weakness, where it's not. It's not at all. And this is a little deviation, but it's funny. But I read something about Betty White, who was being interviewed in one of those group interviews, and somebody said something about having balls, and she goes, wait a minute, where do we get this association between courage and strength and balls? You thump those little things and the guy collapses over, bends over in pain. You want to talk courage and strength? Let's talk vaginas. Those things take a pounding.
She's still sharp in her 90s. That woman's great.
It's amazing. She's amazing.
As a younger kid, like I'd feel the need to be nice to somebody, even though I was talking about picking on that kid earlier. I mean, the reality is if I wanted to find a way to agree with you. So if you're going to talk to me, I'm going to find some common denominator and agree. Even if I disagreed, I felt like this need to agree. And I don't know when I woke up on that. It's like I had to learn to disagree with people appropriately and not feel the need to say something that whatever I thought they needed to hear. That's another way I feel liberated from a power perspective, is not feeling like I have to tell you what you want to hear.
Exactly.
And those little things, right? Are there other examples of that?
Oh my God, there's so many, and we've all been there. We've all done that. Like the number of times that we have given our power away just to avoid conflict or confrontation is like countless. And yeah, like saying, how many times have we said yes to something that we really didn't want to do, that inside we felt, no, like I don't want to do this. It didn't feel right, but to avoid rejection or to maintain a semblance of peace, we said yes. And not to say that there isn't compromise. Of course, there's always compromise in relationships. And that means we're going to do things that we really didn't want to do. And so are they. But it's the pattern that we're talking about. And it's when it comes from that place that you're talking about, which we've all done, which is where we override our inner truth in order to appease somebody or for a false sense of acceptance. And it's just not a good strategy, because that stuff turns into resentment. And then that starts getting in the way of the relationship. And then it becomes a power struggle.
Yep.
And that's where we get into all these power struggles in relationships.
You do a lot of work on the leadership front, as do I. And one of the things that I think is a major issue across I'm sure across the globe, but specifically in our country, is people afraid to speak up at work. Even I know we may be going to the other side of that right now, where people are maybe saying way too much. They're abusing. Now we're going to get back at everybody. But there's a lot of unspoken tension that sits inside of companies all over this country. Publicly traded companies, private companies, government, whatever, police departments, where people feel like it's not even worth it to say anything. It's not going to make a difference. And where they give that power away and then carry those stresses or that resentment that you talked about. Why do we go there first and not toward this soulful power that you talk about in your book? Why don't we gravitate that way naturally?
I know. And then what happens is, right, like in the workplace, it turns into passive aggressiveness. Or you know, because we don't really agree and we feel like we were treated unfairly. So then when, okay, oh yeah, you want me to do this? Okay, just wait.
Yeah.
And then I start sidelining it and giving other things priority, and in some cases even sabotaging projects. Or we gossip about other people in the workplace behind their back. And, you know, initially that might feel like, for a few minutes, it might feel good, but inevitably we walk away feeling like crap, like we want to take a shower after that, because what we're trying to do really is equalize the perceived imbalance of power. But so, and ultimately putting somebody down is, whether we do it in front of them, like, you know, like if we're in a supervisor role and we take somebody down to their knees and destroy them in front of others, like that doesn't do anybody any good, and it doesn't feel good. It might have like a little bit of a good feeling for a little bit, but ultimately it doesn't feel good, because it can't. It doesn't really get us what we ultimately want, which is for you know, to be happy and to have you know, fulfilling relationships and the lives that are filled with meaning and purpose. And we want that for our loved ones. And like revenge is another one of these unhealthy power plays, you know, where we get somebody back and we feel like by getting somebody back, you know, we're gonna bring balance to that perceived, you know, imbalance of in the equation. It doesn't really work. Like, you know, like Gandhi says, an eye for an eye and the whole world goes blind. And I just don't know what it's going to take, right? And I think part of the reason we give our power away this way is because we don't know that there's another way. We've all got this misunderstanding that power means power over. And what we're beginning, like even in leadership circles, you know, where there's so much being written now about the servant leader, that leads by example and by inspiration rather than top down directives. And I'm gonna my way or the highway kind of thing. Like, I think slowly but surely things are changing even in the workplace.
Yeah, I agree with that. The flip side to the servant leader is misunderstanding what that actually means. There are a lot of servant leaders out there that are just befriending their people or enabling their people and putting it under the servant bucket, not realizing, no, you're making things worse.
Yes.
You know,
Yes,
again,
and that's a really good point, Dave, because this is not creating this, it's not a binary, right? And I say that in the book, that there are times in which worldly power, you know, or ego power, as I call it, is appropriate. And so it's not saying that it's always bad. But so for example, if we're standing in a room of, you know, 500 people and the fire alarm goes off, it's not a time to say, okay, you beautiful, wonderful souls, raise your hand if you think we should use that exit. Oh, beautiful, yay. How many of you think we should use that exit? Yay. No, it's like, go, right? We tell people what to do.
right.
Or with a kid, you know, disciplining a child, which doesn't feel good.
Right.
But we're doing it for their own good. Like,
Right.
you know, you can't run into a busy street. And so and that's directive, you know, power over.
Yep.
But it's not an abuse of power
Right.
necessarily. It's where it's the intention is where we're coming from.
So a person in your shoes that teaches this stuff, and to some extent I do, but to not at the level you do. It's on us to recognize that not everyone is even in that place. Most people, I don't think, are there. So you've got to have a tremendous amount of patience. One, here's what I'm taking away, and tell me what I'm missing here. One is we all have to have awareness. It all starts with, am I aware of what's going on inside of me? Do I recognize it in the moment? Can I call timeouts? Even privately, can I call timeout? And then looking at, why do I have that thought? Or why do I have that feeling? And it isn't even real. Like why am I validating that thing?
Yeah.
You know, and then once you get to that point, isn't that where the breath comes in? I'm just all that exists right now is me breathing. That's it. These thoughts are not necessarily, we don't need to validate those things. Is that kind of what?
No, you're totally right on. And yeah, self-awareness, that's step one. And and asking why do we believe the things we do? Like going back to your question about vulnerability, it's like we think this is powerful. It's like, wait a minute, this is not powerful. This is prison. This is like living in constant DEFCON 1, like waiting for the next attack. Sometimes like squeezing, like sneaking in the first punch just in case preemptively. It's like, what a way to live. That's prison. Like, if we think about it, this, like opening up our arms, is really a much more empowered place, because this is saying, you know what, life, I got this. No matter what you throw my way, I got this. Right. And I know that I'm going to land on my feet. And I know that no matter what comes my way, I will know how to respond and how to show up in response. That's an incredibly empowered place of self-assurance.
Let's just take somebody right now that's pissed off at the world or their family or their friends or whatever. They just hate everybody right now. And they feel this need to like lock and load. I don't care. I'm full of my judgment. You're an a-hole. You're wrong. I know what I'm doing. Whatever. That person, we all know them. I've been that person. I'm sure at some point you have as well. Like, how do you get somebody to recognize it, but then there's got to be a clue, like you said. Like, there are things that we did as younger people that you still carry today. It still feels gross. Gossip always makes me feel like I need to take a shower. That's a great analogy. Yeah. Is that the cue or the clue, I should say, that I feel gross? I just have to admit that I feel gross.
Yeah, that's a clue for sure. It is for me too. How do we feel afterwards? And we got to be honest, right? We got to look at ourselves like point blank, and not sugarcoat the stuff even to ourselves, and not rationalize things, which we're all brilliant. Those are all functions of the ego. Now, the ego, I say, went to law school, and it's always building a case to prove that it's right, and it takes everything personally. It's always stuck in victim mode. It's always passing judgment, not only of others but of ourselves. Like that the ego is that harsh inner judge. The things we tell ourselves inside of our heads, we would never say to anybody else. We're so harsh and cruel with ourselves. And so, if that's working for you, knock yourself out. If living that way works for you, knock yourself out. But I got to tell you, the outcome is not good, because it's, that bile that's being produced in our bodies is eating up ourselves up from the inside out. And yeah, some of the things we do and some of the behaviors we have or the words we say to others, yeah, they're going to be hurt. And mostly they're hurting ourselves, because those negative feelings, that anger, that all that stuff is literally eating ourselves up from the inside. And then eventually that shows up as physical symptoms.
Just reminds me of a kid as a child. We lived in a very angry home. And my mom she's very, very angry. And as a kid, as much as I hated it, I believed that anger is because she's carrying the weight of the world. She understands in my little mind, well, she understands how many problems this world has, she has, and that's the reason she's so mad. And that's the reason she treats us this way. And I rationalized it. It made sense to me. She understands what no one else understands. And looking at it now, I'm like, this is what killed her. This is ultimately what, why she was unhealthy, unhappy, depressed, died of cancer, et cetera. And I think, that probably has, the way we think, I think definitely impacts the way we feel physically.
Yeah. And she felt probably, I don't know anything about it, but she probably felt trapped in some way. As a woman at that time, there's so many ways in which women didn't have opportunities, and that just it wasn't right. It's still, the system is still unequal between the genders and in many other ways. But again, it's like, all right, well, that sucks, right? And how am I going to show up in response to that? What am I going to do about that? And that's how we begin to reclaim our power. And we have story after story of people who faced the most incredible obstacles, and they overcame them. They overrode them. There's so many stories to inspire us that no matter what happened in our past, and I'm so sorry about all that stuff, that should have never happened to anybody, but we can't continue giving our power away to that, because otherwise, at some point now it's our choice. to keep ourselves in that victim mode.
So I want you to have the last word here. I want the one thing that we haven't said that I was thinking about when I read the book, and I did a review on Amazon. But one of the things you talked about was we owe this to ourselves so we can help other people. That's the whole point of it. In a lot of ways, it's like if I don't deal with my own crap and what I think, then how the heck am I going to be good for anybody else?
Exactly.
Isn't that the ultimate intention of the book? Is we've got to do this for ourselves so we can help other people.
Yeah, yeah. The book I see as a call to action. You're right. You know, the way that I look at the world now, it's it's pretty critical. The challenges we're facing, I mean, any one of them would be overwhelming, whether it's the pandemic or climate change or terrorism, etc. You know, the increased polarization, like any one of those things is enough to say, you know what, forget it. And then then when I have those moments, I reel myself back and I say, you know what can I do? I can continue to continue healing and freeing myself and helping as many others as I can. And the planet will be fine. You know, it might take a few million years. Life will continue in some form. Consciousness will continue in some form. Maybe it turns out to be an enlightened cockroach planet. Who knows? Whether we make it, right? We're just now beginning to witness what we have unleashed on the environment, of which the pandemic is a symptom, right? The symptom of our relationship to nature. And so it's all hands on deck. Anybody who's listening to this, who's had the slightest suspicion, inkling that we have work to do as teachers, as healers, as activists to promote change, it's like, this is it. This is the time that we've been waiting for. And it's got to start within. It's got to start within each one of us. We can't really help others until we help ourselves.
We will leave it at that. So where can everyone get Awakening the Solar Power? Amazon, the best place to get it?
It's available wherever books are sold. Yes, on Amazon, and yes, at your local bookstore if you want to support them. And in terms of reaching me, probably my website, soulfulpower.com is the best way to do that. And then they can get to my social media from that. And for your audience, Dave, if they will go to soulfulpower.com and get on my email list, and we know how easy it is to click unsubscribe down the road if you choose to do so. But if they'll get on my email list now, I'll send them a chapter of the book on what it means to live heroically in the 21st century. They'll get some power practices designed to apply the teachings and the concepts to our lives, because we don't need more information so that it doesn't stay at the level of information. We've got information overload. The practices are designed to apply the teachings. So what the result is transformation, not information. And then they'll get a guided teaching and meditation on trust, which I created last year to help us navigate these times of chaos and fear and uncertainty. And thank you, Dave. Thanks so much for the opportunity. I loved the depth of the conversation. I loved your questions. Thanks for having me on the show, and thanks for having the show. I know that in your willingness to do so, many lives are touched and impacted.
Well, thank you, and I hope so. And maybe we'll do this again sometime when when that second book comes out. I'd enjoy that.
I would too. Thank you.
Thank you.